Welcome back to It's Not Normal, the podcast, episode 21. In this week's episode, we're talking all about why I'm doing this. Why did I start this? What was the inspiration or the catalyst for me to start making videos in the first place? How has that changed over time, and where do I hope to go in the future? But before we get into this week's episode, I just want to take a quick minute to thank everyone who's been tuning in and following along. If you've been enjoying these episodes, please be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. Or if you're listening on Spotify, please be sure to leave us a rating. That being said, let's dive into this week's topic. Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? I guess to answer that question fully, we have to kind of bring it back to the very beginning, which for me started the end of September last year. I woke up one morning and I was just really struggling. I felt like I had no idea who I was. I was struggling with my sense of self, with my identity. I felt like how I felt about myself was too easily dictated by external factors, things that were happening that were outside of my control. And that really didn't sit well with me, because even when I was living with my family, with my parents, I still felt like I had a certain level of independence that I was proud of. And I always imagined that moving forward, once I finally moved out and I was kind of going out on my own, that independence would only be strengthened. And yet I think the trauma that I endured, not only in breaking out of my narcissistic family, but also all of the things that started to resurface when I was finally in a safe environment, I think the combination of those two things really sort of were a blow to my confidence and to my independence and to my sense of self. Because I think, so many of us who were raised by narcissistic parents, when we're finally out of that environment and we start to realize our trauma and understand so much of what we endured throughout our childhood and how those things have sort of followed us into adulthood, you're kind of left feeling like not only do you have to completely rebuild sort of this new life, this new identity, and get to know yourself. But before you even get there, you have to break down everything that's already there. You kind of start to question everything that you had once believed to be true. And I think that all sort of plays a part. And so I woke up one morning and I was just feeling really awful. And I felt like I had to make a change. I had to do something about it. And one of the ways that breaking out of my narcissistic family in the manner that I did, how quickly that it all happened, how that sort of manifested itself in my life was through separation anxiety. I developed serious separation anxiety, and I had a really hard time being on my own. And I think this was just compounded by, having siblings growing up, never really having my own room or like a space to call my own. Always feeling like I had to be available to everyone at all times. There wasn't ever a real focus on privacy or alone time or independence. And so I think the combination of those two things just really intensified that for me. And it was just sort of like a perfect storm of emotions that led me to making the decision to just go to the park by myself for the first time in 4 years and just kind of sit there and be by myself. And I remember sitting there just reflecting on a lot, on my childhood, on where I was at now as an adult, all of the things that I was feeling, why I was confused, what I could do moving forward to make this better or to help myself get to where I want to be, or at least start to take the steps to get there. And I just had a lot on my mind, and I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to document it. I wanted to kind of start this journey and be able to revisit where I was at in my head, in my life at that time, because it felt in the moment like a pivotal moment for me. And so I decided to just make a video talking about what I was doing and how I was feeling. And I had posted random videos on TikTok before that, a couple of outfit videos and, from road trips or of my dogs, but it wasn't ever anything of real substance. And so this was the first video that I posted that was very just sort of raw, authentic, me talking, sort of stream of consciousness. And within maybe the first hour of me posting it, it got 800 views, which at the time I think was the most views that any TikTok that I've posted had gotten up until that point. And so I was like, wow, okay, like people are seeing this, and I had gotten comments already from people, and the few comments that I got on that video were so kind and inspiring, and it sort of light bulbs went off in my head where I was like, okay, maybe this isn't a bad thing to talk about. And I feel like that even was like a huge hump for me to get over in the beginning. And I know so many of you understand this feeling when you're raised in that kind of environment. You're really encouraged, sometimes even pressured, to keep family issues within the family, to never talk about any of the negativity that's going on behind the scenes, and to kind of maintain this image to everyone outside of your immediate family. And so it was really difficult for me at first to even entertain the idea of talking openly and honestly about my experience throughout my childhood and the behaviors that I witnessed, that I endured, that I was called upon to mimic at times, and to really dive into how those things manifested themselves in negative ways in my life as I started to realize all of these things. And of course, there were times, especially early on, where I was so fearful that one or both of my parents would somehow see these videos, maybe someone in my family, and they would send it to my parents. It would somehow make their way back to them. And for a while, everything that I posted, I thought about, okay, what if they see this? What are they going to think? Are they going to be upset about this? But I continued to remind myself that if someone is upset with you because you're talking about their behavior and how their behavior impacted you, maybe they just shouldn't have behaved in that way. Maybe they shouldn't have treated you in that way. It's not my responsibility to maintain that image, or to keep secrets, or to pretend like my life was something other than it was. And so that was kind of a hurdle for me to get over in the beginning also. But the thing, probably more than anything else, that really encouraged me to keep digging and sharing were all of the messages and comments that I was receiving. It was absolutely overwhelming. And, in the time since I've been posting videos and shooting this podcast, I understand now that it's a relatively common experience for children who were raised by narcissistic parents to feel completely alone and isolated in their experience. Like, this is something unique to me, and I don't know if anyone else has ever experienced this. I don't even know where to start in describing this. And I think that's a big part of it too. Not only are you pressured to not talk about what's going on, especially the more negative things that maybe would raise red flags, but you're also not given a lot of opportunity to gain perspective. And so, if you do pick up on any toxicity and maybe you talk to someone about it, more often than not, it's so extreme and bizarre and convoluted, the behavior that you're talking about, that so few people can really relate or understand or say, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. I've been through that. I've experienced that too. Because being raised by a narcissistic parent is such a unique, not in the way where not a lot of people experience it, but unique, I think, in how confusing it can be and isolating and frustrating. And it's not what you expect from a parent or from a family dynamic as a whole. It's not so clear cut either, because a lot of what you're talking about is emotional abuse and manipulation and all of these really strange undertones that influence your behavior, and you're kind of conditioned over time to do this, that, and the other thing. It's a really difficult thing to describe, and if you've never experienced that kind of behavior, if you've never been around it or witnessed it, it can be hard to imagine what it's even like, because it's so hurtful. And it's so manipulative. And to imagine a parent doing that to a child is all the more bizarre. So every single comment and message that I got from complete strangers, people that I had never met before, that I would have never connected with otherwise, were reaching out and thanking me for talking about my experience, telling me that I've been able to put words to this emotion or feeling that they haven't been able to describe yet. Or now their life makes so much more sense. Their relationship makes more sense. They're starting to take steps in their own life to set boundaries, and they understand, okay, yeah, there's a reason that I wasn't feeling too great because this is unhealthy. This is wrong. And that sense of community, that camaraderie that came out of sharing those videos, those first few videos, was really the driving force behind all of this. And it was just so overwhelming. And I think in a really positive way, because now not only did I know that I wasn't alone in my experience, and I was with you building a community where we can gain perspective from one another. We can offer up tips and tricks and experiences that might shine a light on our own lives and help us to move forward. We can sort of discover the strength in vulnerability where in the past, these things that we were pressured to not speak about, to sweep under the rug and pretend like they didn't exist, can actually be really positive sources of information. They can sort of help us grow and move forward and learn things about ourselves and others. And for me, throughout my life, I always try to find some sort of a positive or a silver lining, especially in a negative experience. I always say no experience is entirely negative as long as you can learn something from it. And reflecting on a lot of my childhood and my experience growing up with a narcissistic parent, it's so dark and it's so negative and it's so sad that the thought that me sharing these different experiences and these realizations that I have, as an adult can be positive and can help other people who have gone through the same thing or who are currently going through the same thing. It makes it feel like it has some kind of positive purpose or meaning. And, especially in the beginning and even still, I think one of the strongest, influences in everything that I post is I think about myself at 14, 15, 16 years old. Granted, all of this had been going on at that time for years at that point already. But I think, I wouldn't have maybe been able to process it or fully understand it at, 9, 10, 11. I think of myself at, 14, 15, 16 when I had found my first group of friends and I was starting to develop a little bit of independence and a relationship or relationships with people outside of my immediate family. I had a personality and a place outside of my house. I was sort of entering into a new chapter. And if I had seen someone on Instagram or TikTok or YouTube talking so openly about these really strange behaviors and nuances, things that I was experiencing that I was completely naive to at the time, how would that have benefited me? Because so many people experience things like this and relationships with people like this, and we're not always able to get out of it immediately. But the next best thing, in my opinion, is to be aware of what's going on. Because, I imagine when I was a teenager and my friends showed up spontaneously outside to pick me up and just drive around and hang out, I would have known in the moment that it wasn't wrong for me to want to go and do that I didn't have to apologize for going to do that me being on the receiving end of the silent treatment from my narcissistic parent was wrong and unhealthy, and it wasn't personal. It wasn't my problem. It was a them problem. I think knowing what you're dealing with is hugely beneficial, especially when you're dealing with any kind of emotional abuse or manipulation, even while you're in that environment, knowing that, okay, this is not what I should expect from other people. There's a reason that this doesn't feel good, and it's not a result of my own behavior. I shouldn't take these things to heart. I shouldn't take them so personally. I can't imagine how that would have changed my life. And, I've gotten a number of messages. I've gotten so many messages from people, and a few of them really do stand out. A girl messaged me from a different country, and she was talking about her relationship with a narcissistic parent and also with her partner at the time. And, she said something along the lines of how she was really thankful to come across my videos because now she's starting to take steps to repair the relationship with her narcissistic parent because they're actually open to changing their behavior, and taking accountability, maybe entertaining the idea that their behavior sometimes, right, is the root of some of these more negative issues. And she was starting to understand how enduring that kind of behavior influenced her current relationship with a healthy partner. And watching my videos and the things that I've talked about was helping them figure each other out and be more patient with each other. And the idea that through a silly little platform like TikTok, I can have that kind of impact on people who are thousands of miles away. It's unreal to me. So that's what really got all of this started, was a need for me to discover who I was, and immediate reciprocation from hundreds and then thousands of people. And that is what continues to drive this even still. The first chunk of this journey for me was literally me sitting in my truck and just dedicating an hour or two every day to journaling or reflecting and talking about how I was feeling. And it's actually how this podcast got its name. It's Not Normal. I would be sitting there thinking about a particular time or experience in my life, and I found myself starting off quite a few videos with, "It is not normal for your parents to do this, that, and the other thing." And when I started to entertain the idea of actually starting a podcast, that came to mind, because I was like, what a better way to sort of encapsulate so much of what so many of us have experienced, because it's not normal and it's not healthy. And this seemed like the perfect place to dive further into a lot of those topics. And so a lot of that first part was just realizations that I was having in the moment, things that I was realizing about myself, about my childhood, about behaviors of mine and of others, and how I interpreted and perceived things. It was very self-reflective. And as I got a little bit further into it, I saw a book on TikTok, actually, and it was just a very simple account where this girl would open up this book and she had different pages highlighted, and she would just kind of point to, a sentence or two. And so many of them just really resonated with me. And so I ended up getting the book, and that was The Science of Stuck by Britt Frank. And so I read that. And there was one chapter in particular called The Emotionally Unskilled Family, where she outlined 10 different signs of an emotionally unskilled family. And I went 9 for 10 in that chapter. And that was really my launching point in the research side of things, because now I had a real vested interest in narcissism and mental health and understanding more about the long-term effects of being raised by a narcissistic parent. And the more that I researched, the more that I read, the more that I connected with so many of you, I started to understand more about myself and what my life has been like, not only throughout my childhood, but also in the last 4.5, almost 5 years leading up to where I am right now. How did all of these things manifest themselves in ways that I didn't even know about until I read about them in a book? And that was so eye-opening, and it continues to be. I'm currently reading Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents by Lindsay Gibson. And it's again one of those experiences where this complete stranger who has never met me, never talked to me, knows nothing about my life, has written these words that are so reflective of my own experience, where I sit down and I read a paragraph or a chapter if I have enough energy in me, and I feel like I know more about myself and my parents and our relationship and their behavior. And what was so comforting, and what continues to be comforting for me in the research that I do about these topics, is I feel much less alone. I feel like it's not personal. I understand the behavior a lot more. And so it helps me to make sense of things, because I think when you're a kid experiencing so much toxicity and especially when you're naive to it, when you don't know that there are words for these feelings and these behaviors, it can all feel so overwhelming. And you're left sometimes questioning yourself, doubting yourself, feeling like you said or did something wrong to cause all of this, that maybe you deserve this somehow. As you get older and you start to realize that this behavior is caused by something, right? Unresolved trauma, someone else's own personal issues, their life experience, and they're sort of projecting these things onto you as a result of that, it makes everything a lot clearer and a little bit easier to handle and to manage, because it's like, okay, these are topics that have been studied, that have been researched. This is not unique to me or my parents or our relationship or my experience in general, for that matter. This is something that a lot of people experience, and now I understand why to a certain extent. And that sort of makes me reflect on what we're doing here right now. We're being vulnerable and authentic, right? We're sharing our experiences, which all contributes to us feeling less and less alone. It contributes to that perspective that I think is so crucial in realizing our trauma and in healing. And as I got further into this, that was another sort of light bulb that went off in my head in terms of feeling motivated to continue sharing. And, when I was on Insight with Katie and Helen, I remember talking to them briefly about imposter syndrome, or even when Katie first reached out to me, I saw a message from her in my inbox, and she's a licensed psychotherapist. And I thought immediately that, okay, she's messaging me because I said or did something wrong. And, maybe I didn't use a term properly. I'm not a licensed professional. Maybe she feels like I shouldn't be talking about these subjects. And when I read the message, it was an invite to be on the podcast. And so when we were talking about this during the episode, she said, well, you may not be a licensed professional, but what you are is an expert in your own experience. And that really resonated with me, because I think that's why I felt justified in speaking about these topics to begin with. I think, a lot of the people, when I started to dive further into these topics that I started to follow on social media, were either licensed professionals, therapists, psychotherapists, or a lot of people who were talking about this were talking mainly about romantic relationships with narcissists, a narcissist being your romantic partner and what it's like healing from that. And something that I didn't see as much was the kid's perspective. And I think that is so valuable, because it's a hard thing to speak negatively, or honestly, I should say, about your parent sometimes. I think to a lot of people, the title of mom and dad sort of erases a lot of that negativity, a lot of the times that they completely dismissed your boundaries and crossed the line, right? It's like, well, they're your parents. I feel like that's a blanket statement that lets a lot of really awful behavior, whether it's, words or actions, sort of go by unnoticed. And I think what a lot of people fail to realize when they say something like that is the lasting effect that those behaviors have on that kid, and the way that that behavior is going to impact them and follow them and sort of permeate all of these strange little aspects of their lives. And they may not know about it until way later in life, when they go through a similar experience and that pops up, right? And they react in a really strange way. They're triggered by something and it's like, whoa, why did that happen? Why do I feel this way? And then they can trace it back to that particular experience or behavior. And so I think it's really important to speak honestly about relationships with our parents and our family and our experience growing up. And what I try to convey in everything, really, especially when I'm speaking particularly about an experience or a memory, and this is also in the book that I'm reading now, seeing our parents accurately is not betrayal. And I think to take it one step further, speaking about our experience accurately is not betrayal. There's nothing wrong with that. And, I've gotten some comments, obviously, as you do on the internet, that are a little bit more negative, or that use that blanket statement, oh, well, they're your parents, maybe they didn't mean any harm. And I think what I really want to convey to those people who think that I'm just some, 26-year-old kid who's coming on here trying to badmouth my parents, that my goal is in no way, shape, or form to badmouth my parents, to make them look bad, or to encourage other people to see things that aren't there in their own relationships with their parents, to encourage them to speak negatively about their parents. It is so far from that. It is much less about our parents and much more about us, right? But part of understanding us is tracing back those negative behaviors that we picked up from our parents. And that's okay, right? We want to better understand why our parents are the way they are. Can they change? What is our role in that, right? If we've come to the realization that, you know what, my parent is a narcissist and they live in this diluted version of reality. What are the right next steps for me? What are my options? I didn't know that I could set boundaries. I didn't know that I could go no contact. It's sort of just providing information to allow other people to understand their parents and in turn themselves better. That is and always has been the goal. And even now, I'm working right now on a series of videos for YouTube that I'm so excited about. That, again, 14, 15, 16-year-old me, had this been available or accessible to me at that time, would have been life-changing. And the goal is education, right? It's arming ourselves with information so that we can understand more. We can develop that self-awareness that is so crucial, again, in healing, right? Understanding our own behavior, being able to sort of in the moment assess what's going on, why it's making you feel the way that you feel, and then asking yourself, how do I want to handle this moving forward? You know, who do I want to be? What's the life that I want to live? And how can I take steps to get there? Self-awareness is the first step in a lot of that. And so I hope to inspire self-awareness. I hope to educate. I hope to, in school, I was always a really good student. And I think that it comes from the perfectionism in me. I don't necessarily think I was born with some predisposition where I'm really good at math or history, and that's why I always did so well on tests. I think it was because I was incredibly fearful of failure, and I never wanted to experience or endure the anxiety that went along with showing up to school feeling unprepared. And so I would study for 4, 5, 6 hours if that's what it took for me to feel comfortable with a particular subject. I loved writing essays. I loved researching every single thing about a topic so that I felt informed. And now I'm using that same work ethic, but I'm applying it to narcissism and mental health and the different roles within a narcissistic family, projection, enmeshment, all of these behaviors that you might have experienced that you were naive to. And my goal in all of this is to educate. And I think one of the really cool things about social media is that you can reach so many people that you never would have been able to connect with otherwise. And so I hope to channel my inner student, which has been really great to sort of revisit this part of myself in a completely different setting, a less academic setting, and to research all of these topics that I think I would have benefited from when I was younger, and then to put them together in a really digestible, effective way so that anyone who's experiencing this or has experienced this can watch them, can process them, and then can use them, sort of apply them to their own lives to move forward in a really positive way. That's my goal, I think, with everything that I do. And through all of this, I think I've been able to discover who I am a little bit more, which was sort of the goal at the start of this. I was asking myself, who am I? What do I even like? What do I want to do? What's important to me? So many of these questions, I think so many of us have to ask ourselves for the first time as adults, because so often that's the first time that we're in a supportive, safe, calm environment where we have the time to sort of sit back and ask ourselves those questions. We have a partner or a friend who is open to hearing. They actually want to hear what we have to say, what our opinions are. We're not pressured or conditioned to feel a particular way. We're not going to be punished for our opinions if they differ from someone else. It's a really unique experience for, I think, most people who are raised by a narcissistic parent. And so throughout all of this, I've been able to discover a little bit more of who I am. For the first 4 years after moving out of my parents' house, Brandon and I were building furniture. We were designing and building furniture, and that was sort of what I was doing even a little bit before that. That was sort of the direction that I was heading in. I had taken up woodworking as a hobby. I was painting and drawing on tables that I had built, and then it became a full-fledged business. And I think at the time, it was a really positive thing. It was a great creative outlet for me to kind of focus a lot of my time and energy on. Looking back, I think I needed time to process everything that had happened, and to have that outlet was really beneficial. But it also just kind of kept me on a relatively similar path where I was doing things that I was familiar with, and I had been doing it for years at that point. And so this was the first time in a long time that I was able to kind of take a step back and do something completely new. I've always wanted to get into photo and video and media in some way, shape, or form. And I never really knew how to start. I think a lot of it now, looking back, that I understand a little bit more about myself. I think it was that perfectionism that always stopped me, that always got in my way, because I always felt like, well, maybe, the lighting isn't good, or the sound isn't going to be good, or, maybe the background is really messy and it's going to be distracting, and I have to use the same font and the same text every single time so that it's consistent, so that it feels good, so that it makes sense in my head. And I think I was always just getting in my own way. And the difference with this was that the message, what I was talking about, was far more important than how I was talking about it, if that makes sense. And I think this has allowed me to feel comfortable in my own skin in front of the camera. It's something that I'm still working on. I think sometimes if I sit down to shoot a video and I stumble a lot, I feel pressured or like I want to reshoot it to do it better, right? Because I have this idea of what perfect is in my brain. I have sort of this standard that if I don't live up to that with every single thing that I do, then it's going to eat away at me, and I'm going to think about it before I go to sleep at night, and it's going to bother me, or maybe I just won't do anything with it at all. And so I think this has been a way for me to consistently work against that and to feel comfortable with my mistakes, with my imperfections, with the thoughts that I have, feeling comfortable speaking openly and honestly, sharing my opinions with other people, my opinions, not the opinions of someone else that I've been conditioned to take on as my own. And it's also given me time and opportunity to get to know myself in new ways. When I was building furniture, I wore the same 3 or 4 outfits. I would cycle through them because I am a bit of a messy worker, believe it or not. And sometimes I would have glue or paint or stain or whatever it might be all over my pants and my shirt, right? Or sometimes it would be an accident, but either way, I ended up looking like I was a woodworker, like I was fresh out of a wood shop. And that applied to a lot of other things also. I was so focused on one part of my life that now, I wake up and I pick out a different outfit every morning. And it makes me think about when I was younger, probably until 3rd grade. 3rd grade was sort of a turning point, I think, in my life in terms of my relationship to clothes and my personal style, my identity in that way. My school district got uniforms. Before that, I was so girly. I loved wearing clothes, different kinds of clothes and outfits and dressing up, and that all kind of came to a stop. I was a tomboy who wouldn't spend more than 5 minutes in front of the mirror putting my hair in a ponytail, never got my nails done, never felt comfortable enough to experiment with clothes or style or hairstyles or jewelry for that matter. And now I'm doing that for the first time, where I am trying new things. I'm wearing different clothes. Even with food, I was such a picky eater, and this is the first time I'm in an environment where I don't feel pressured to try new things, or if I do want to try something new, there's not going to be a spectacle made out of it. And so I feel like talking about all of these things and intentionally reflecting on my own experience and asking myself these questions has opened a lot of doors for me, and that has been so much fun. And I hope to continue to be able to do that while doing this. I hope to continue to learn more about myself and implement these things, which kind of brings me to this announcement that I hinted at last week. But this episode 21 of It's Not Normal is going to be the conclusion of season 1. The way that I'm sort of looking at this is these first 21 weeks have been everything centered around realizing my trauma, how it's manifested itself in my adulthood, sort of this first chapter of my healing journey. And while I'm absolutely going to continue to talk about mental health topics, and obviously this is a huge part of my life, it's not like this just stops somewhere and I can move on and start doing new things, but come April 11th, which just so happens to be my 27th birthday, it's about 2 weeks from when this episode is going out, we will be starting It's Not Normal Season 2. And what that looks like is more diverse topics, some guests even, so that I can start to have a little bit more conversation, which I'm really excited about. I can introduce other people, other people's experiences and perspectives to sort of broaden all of our horizons, right? To offer up that perspective that's so important. You know, I've done a lot of things in my life, and something that's really important for me at this time in my life is to really start to embody the idea that my trauma does not define me. Yes, it has influenced my behavior, my words, my actions, my decisions, my reactions for that matter. And it is something that I'm going to continue to work to understand and unpack. It's something that's going to continue to sort of permeate all of these different aspects of my life. But there is so much more to me and my experience than that. And I don't want to get stuck dwelling or allowing the past to resurface. I think, you know, in that first book that I read, The Science of Stuck, one of the phrases that really stuck out to me was, the past stays present until it's processed. And it couldn't be more true when you're talking about trauma, right? I think a lot of us suppressed our emotions, how we were truly feeling when we were in those toxic environments, because we weren't really allowed to let those emotions surface. I think so often when you're raised by a narcissistic parent, it's almost as if you're not allowed to feel anything if it's not positive or thankful or grateful or happy, right? Those negative but very real and valid emotions aren't really allowed to come to the surface, because if they do, it becomes even more of a problem. And so I feel like I'm at a time in my life right now where I've processed a lot of my past, and I'm getting ready to leave it there and to focus more on the present and the future. Who am I now? What do I want to do moving forward now that I have this self-awareness? And so I'm going to be introducing a lot more topics. I think that was even sort of in my brain when I decided to change my username to BigSisCasey. I think one of, oldest daughters, I think so often do take on a lot of familial responsibilities, especially when you're dealing with an emotionally abusive or immature parent. But there's so much more to being a big sister that's kind of intertwined with that. My experience with birth control. I started a business when I was 22. I'm married. That's new, right? I'm approaching my 1-year marriage anniversary, which is insane to me. I've traveled the country a couple of times. I have a lot of life experiences, and they're all things that I want to talk about. I want to offer up my perspective in the same way that I've been able to in talking about my childhood and my experience with a narcissistic parent, but I want to apply that to different aspects of my life and your life. Things that I've experienced that, similar to this, I'm sure so many other people have experienced. And I think with all of that in mind, my goal has been and continues to be education and help. I want to educate myself further about a lot of these topics that I'm curious about, and then pass that information along to you. I feel like I'm pretty good at doing research. I like sitting down and learning new things. And, I wanted to be a teacher when I was in kindergarten. Brief little tangent here, but when I was in kindergarten, I really wanted to be a teacher. And my teacher showed up one day with laryngitis. And before the morning was even over, her voice was completely gone. And I was such an attentive student, even that young, I knew the entire schedule for the day. And so she had me sort of take over the class where I would assign everyone their groups. I was leading us to our special that day. I just knew the lay of the land. I knew the routine, and she trusted me with that responsibility. And that was such a formative experience for me because it made me feel like I really wanted to be a teacher. And in some ways, I feel like that's what this is allowing me to do. It's allowing me to educate myself about topics that are really important and then convey that to so many people that I never would have been able to connect with in a classroom. And in doing so, I hope to help. I think one of the things that sharing my experience growing up with a narcissistic parent has taught me, on social media, is that there is so much power and strength in vulnerability and authenticity. And I think that is something that we're lacking now more than ever with social media. I think all of these different platforms make it so easy for people to portray this version of themselves or their life that is so picture perfect and ideal that it's so easy to compare ourselves to others, right? And then to sort of dwell on maybe the things that we aren't doing, to feel like we're behind or that we should be doing something differently. It plays on our insecurities and our fear of falling behind or missing out. And so I want to continue to be vulnerable and authentic and transparent and to speak realistically about what life is like. Because, it's strange. I graduated at the top of my class and then I dropped out of college. I encountered a lot of different people when I was designing and building furniture. I have gone through all of these really strange things, and I've probably thought way too much about them. But I think something that this has taught me is that my perspective, everyone's perspective for that matter, is valuable. And it's something that I'm willing to share because I think that it can be helpful. And so moving forward, I cannot wait not only to talk to more people, but to talk about more things. And, this is another part of that healing journey where, I've thought about this and at times I was fearful because in the same way that I once felt that if I existed with my narcissistic parents in a certain way for the first 2 decades of my life, that I was complacent and receptive and, compliant, I guess. I felt that I owed them that same complacency for the rest of my life. Because it was like, well, if I did this once, then I should be able to do this for the rest of my life. And this is what they've grown used to from me. So if I decide to switch it up now, even if this feels truer to me at this time in my life, I feel like I'm doing something wrong, like I'm betraying them or I'm going to disappoint them. And there have been times when I thought about this and I felt scared because I got my start on social media talking mainly about narcissism and mental health and healing from that kind of emotional abuse and manipulation. And I felt like it was all in my head, but I sort of made a box for myself and then put myself in it. And it took me a while to convince myself and remind myself that, one, the people who are here for me are here for me, regardless of what I'm talking about. And two, there is no box. There are no expectations. Just because I started somewhere doesn't mean that I can't evolve into something else, because the common thread throughout it all is me, and I think it's a really hard thing to sort of relieve yourself of expectations, the expectations that you think other people have of you, and then to actually act on that. And I think that is something that I'm putting into practice with this season 2, with this sort of broadening of the topics that we're going to be talking about, introducing other people, other experiences, other stories. But it's something that I'm really excited about. It's something that I can't wait to get into. It's new, it's different, it's change. And even that can be hard. Change was always so scary for me because rarely did I ever think that change could be a positive thing. I always sort of wanted things to stay the same because, hey, if things were going well now, let's keep it going. If we change it up, we risk really messing this thing up that we've got going. And again, I think that's a bit of a trauma response where, spontaneity or change didn't always mean something positive. It was sort of like so many of us, I think, were just kind of existing in these spaces of peace, these little chunks of time where things seemed kind of steady. We had our balance, and we didn't want anything to change because just like that, we're going to lose that peace, right? We're going to lose that sense of calm or security, no matter how fleeting we know it actually is. It feels good in the moment. And so the idea that by moving forward, right, and sort of following through on this idea that I'm excited about, that I feel ready for, it's putting into practice not only the idea that I am not defined by my trauma, right? There is so much more to me and my story that I have to offer than that. But it's also opening the door for positive change. I'm putting myself in a position where I can show myself that, hey, it doesn't have to be that scary. And maybe this can actually be a really positive thing. This can be a good thing for me moving forward. And so I'm really excited about it. We're going to take 2 weeks to get everything all set up and to kind of make this transition. I'm still going to be active on TikTok and Instagram, but we're going to take 2 weeks. And I think it's so fitting that the first episode of this new season is going to be coming out not only on my birthday, because, hey, new chapter, right? But it's also springtime. And springtime sort of makes me think about new life and rebirth. It's sort of the next chapter. And I'm so thankful to be at a point in my life where I've realized so much of my trauma. I've unpacked it. I've sat with the discomfort and the sadness. I've grieved. I've mourned. I've felt the frustration. But I've also felt the freedom and the happiness and the connection with so many of you. It's been life-changing. And I'm so excited. I'm so excited to keep going and to continue to build this community because I just want to make life easier for anyone that I can, I think, and then I'll wrap this up. But, being raised in that kind of environment and dealing with that kind of relationship, those realizations, that sense of loss as you become an adult and you experience these really important life moments, whether it's a wedding or having a kid or, taking a trip that you've been talking about for a really long time. It's so frustrating. And, there have been times when I was angry and sad and overwhelmed, and I want to help people who have experienced that. I want them to know that it's okay, that there's a light at the end of the tunnel as long as you keep going, and that there is life after that. And not only that, but I guess while I'm here, I do want to share with you my bigger hopes for all of this, and in my personal life. I think social media has been something that I wanted to get into for a long time now, because I think it's a great way to spread positivity and to reach so many more people than you ever could in real life. And one of the things that I hope to do through that is help the people who have helped me in my personal life, because there are a handful of people who not only have stuck by me through all of this, but have been so patient and have given me the time and space to heal and pursue the things that I'm interested in. And the idea that maybe doing this can not only benefit so many other people in the world, but also the people closest to me in my life who helped me when I needed it the most. I would love to repay them. And so that's why I'm so determined to work so hard at this every single day. And, oh gosh, with that, I don't know if I could talk much more about it. I think I am going to wrap up not only this week's episode, but season 1 of It's Not Normal. And I will be back not next week, but in 2 weeks with another episode, the first episode of season 2. So thank you so much to everyone who is a part of this community so far. I am so thankful for all of your support and encouragement, and I cannot wait to see where this journey takes us.